The name throw you for a loop? Contradiction sure works as a hook, huh? I'd like to explain it first before we continue because I'm pretty convinced you, the valued viewer, have misunderstood. Yes, it's disconnected, but not in every way you might think. Wait, what's disconnected? On January the 31st, 2024, so the year this video was made, the Lantern Rite happened.
Liyue Harbor is always changing, so it is only fitting that Lantern Rite should change in turn.
It was very cool. I like. On top of this, similar to the other updates featuring the same event, a new area was released alongside it. Although, instead of being an expansion to the newest nation at the time, such as Enkanomiya and Inazuma, this version expanded the Lantern Rite's primary nation, Liyue. Within Liyue, a long-teased area, Chenyu Vale, was released with full force. Look at brand new mountains, beautiful green fields, and most importantly, tea. I'm just tea. Hell yeah. Let's get into it. Like, subscribe, join the membership, and grab some tea because we're jumping right in. Time to spill the tea.
Lantern Rite should be a day of reunion.
I don't know. I don't remember.
You chose a path without a future.
Spare my innocent child. I alone am the source of this sin.
This place has very unique shoes to fill, especially in the realm of environments. While places like the chasm need to expand on an existing nation while trying to be similar, on the surface, it's a single section of the map that is clearly more of an independent landmark rather than a basic expansion on existing land, similar to Dragonspine. The desert of Hamadravith is a good example for how to blend both a landmark and design consistencies, but the chasm does more than good enough. Enkanomiya is solely underground and clearly wants to be its own thing, so that's fine, and I don't know what's going on with Fontaine's upcoming expansion. My point is, Chenyu Vale does its own thing. It's more like a traditional expansion to a nation while it's still in its respective 9 or so debut versions rather than a sub-region. This is clearly because it has 3 sections, and clearly aims to be more traditional. Problem is, it has zero connection to the original nation, even less so than something like the chasm. Chenyu Vale is incredibly bold with its disconnect, immediately shooting the player's eyes with green. Wait. It shoots you with something else first. It's quest related, sure, but I'm mentioning it now because it's forced upon the player. Fu Jin, an adeptus exclusive to this part of the nation, almost instantly teleports you to a cavern underneath the veil. Here she lore dumps you a bit, I neglected the dialogue significantly, and then eventually teleports you above ground. From now on, your adventuring experience can go blissfully uninterrupted. Yay! Time to get to the actual environment stuff now. As stated, it's bold with its disconnect, primarily through the colour scheme and core design elements of the terrain. Firstly, Liyue has always been driven by warmer colours, similar to the majority of Sumeru. It's got various shades of yellow and orange, with some green in places like Lisha and parts of Bishui Plain. However, those areas have a darker green that is directly linked to the present shades of yellow. The chasm has the orange of the nation, showing some sort of unnatural irritation of the land, as if a part of somebody's skin became extremely red and dry. Weird comparison, but the place is exactly those things. Yippee! So why am I yapping about other parts of the land of Geo? Well, it's to emphasize the disconnect I've briefly mentioned twice before. Big shocker. If you look at Chenyu Vale, the colour is a branch off turquoise, which you don't need a colour wheel or anything to identify the oddity with. It's purely cool colours. May confuse you if you remember Bishui Plain and Lisha, but just look at it. This ain't even reminiscent of yellow, and it's literally the opposite of orange on, yes, the colour wheel. I'm addicted to it, I know. I like this, however, because it shows a pure, thriving, plentiful connection to nature. The chasm is ruined, while Chenyu Vale is thriving, if we ignore the world quest of course. Though regardless of this, I still dislike its disconnection with the rest of the nation. Thought and care can't justify but only motivate. The fact it's an extremely pure cold colour that isn't even close to any warm colours used within most of the nation infuriates me, and it always put me off a bit. In the beginning, despite this, I tried to convince myself that Liyue was meant to be incredibly colourful, but I don't even know why that would be an intentional design factor, considering there's absolutely no reason for it besides the fact it's inspired by China, therefore making it so the developers need to go ham with the Liyue content. Point is, it's disconnected, like the FNAF song. Let's say you're sick of colours, let's say you hate me yapping about the same thing for like a minute, or alternatively, you just feel a little bored. Well, lucky for those very specific types of people that most likely aren't even reminiscent of your current mindset, I'm switching it up. Look at the terrain of Liyue. There's an excess of beaches, flat terrain that contrasts the mountainous terrain, with the mountains really emphasized on due to said terrain. This helps remind the player that this is indeed the nation of Geo, and the earth is both incredibly intrusive but intimidating. It's also very narrow on places like Minlin, giving that fantasy feeling. Chenyu Vale contributes to this fantasy feeling, but in a way that is mostly through mechanics and story, excluding 2 landmarks, the first being Jade Mouth. We can discuss this soon, however. For now, at least in my opinion, Chenyu Vale mostly resembles Sumeru in the terrain of the place. Immensely mountainous, too much so, but in a rounder, nature-oriented, and somewhat generic fashion. I know this sounds insulting, but I love Sumeru. It's my favourite nation, and I'd be lying if I didn't love exploring Chenyu Vale as well. I just believe it has no business being a part of Liyue if we ignore its architecture, story, soundtrack, and NPCs. Now, let's talk about why it's a wonder. You know, the fantasy stuff I mentioned. Firstly, Jademouth is very clearly fantasy inspired, being constructed from jadeite. This material should be familiar to Liyue fans, from things such as the Jade Chamber. It has very supernatural qualities, being able to harness adeptal energies in order to make stuff float, linked to other jadeite stuff, and yeah, forgot the rest of the specifics. The other fantasy trait is its clear sizing. It's extremely oversized compared to the rest of the place, being a uniquely structured colossus of mysterious fantasy fun. Mount Zhuanlian, or Zhuanlan, or whatever, I'm not sure, which creates fantasy in a faithful way, is probably my favourite place in the whole sub-region, however. Despite the fact that this sub-region is so damn disconnected that it looks and feels like a different nation majority of the time, this place, despite the colour palettes, is extremely faithful to Liyue before version 4.4. It notes where the nation left off, continuing Minland briefly with familiar mountainous terrain with its own Chenyu set of quirks, such as using carps and jadeite platforms. I loved this area, but it's a shame how small it is. This carries on to the rest of the place too, in my opinion. I think the problem is the size. They could have, and maybe should have, filled the empty gap west of Chenyu Vale with more Vale. They tried too hard to cram a lot of content within a small space, ending up leaving no room for calm places in order to emphasize on the crazy ones. This is a design principle shown throughout all nations until either Sumeru Desert or Fontaine, in my opinion. They tried to have constant content instead of giving breaks, which might be confusing to hear due to how peaceful the Vale is, but I'm mainly referring to terrain of mountains here. It's constant mountain after mountain, which is confirmed by their need to have mobility support throughout the place in the form of cart mechanics. The rest of Liyue had none of this, and overall I just don't know. It's so disconnected from what it was meant to be, in my opinion, and feels like an adopted child in a family of blood-related ones. Editing tea here. I've been kinda getting distracted whilst finding footage, finding Reddit posts and lore videos, so I believe it's necessary to add that I obviously understand Chenyu Vale, both used to be a separate place a millennia ago, as well as that it is a biome first and foremost. However, when you give this biome the same individualism and difference as a separate nation would have, as well as calling it initially a separate nation, even though it's also inspired by China, it just doesn't really work as an argument as to why it's not so disconnected. Just felt necessary to say. I'll give it back to Present now. A reminder I still love Chenyu Vale, and despite the fact it feels different, I enjoyed it very much. It definitely began to slowly feel more like Liyue towards the end when I focused more on the story, but I consider that a problem that I'll explain later. Good place, but wrong place immense. It's just too different for something like Liyue, and the 3 or 4 year difference between releases doesn't help. Let's go to the gameplay, which continues to highlight this disconnect. At least they used Liyue's battle themes. Chenyu Vale's gameplay is kind of irritating to first go into, but it's amazing once you develop a bond of sorts with it, giving a taste of how it feels to live in this nature-ridden, adeptus-driven part of Liyue. That's the only connection to harbours, however. Well, ignoring the fact jadeite platforms have jadeite in them. I said harbour. This is the connection to Liyue Harbour. Anyway, the mechanics sort of resemble a mix of Fontaine and Inazuma, while having the consistency and ease of Sumeru, similar to the overall terrain. They clearly wanted to have a more laid-back approach to the general difficulty of the puzzles, as Liyue is a very relaxing, beautiful nation, while having it be a little hard to initially get into due to the very clear focus on adepti and tradition throughout the sub-region. This highlights a possible justification for why Chenyu Vale is so disconnected, being that it's meant to highlight the ancient practice and tradition of Liyue, while the general nation has grown up and moved on. However, things like the vast concentration of harvested resources throughout the Vale, paired with the clear narrative themes, somewhat contradict this. For now though, let's talk solely on why the mechanics do indeed push the Adepti-focused narrative. The mechanics are quite literally built on Adeptal energies and Jadeites. We love Jadeite, whether it's sacred simulacrums, which are statues that can host Adepti inside them that can be moved with corresponding energies, or the countless mechanics that can be lit up by said energies as well. All of these things are themed around movements and locations, like I said, similar to Fontaine and Inazuma. Once again, like I said, this is because Liyue is the land of Geo. Geology has, unsurprisingly, a lot to do with geography. Geography is a very present theme throughout Chenyu Vale's mechanics, but not so much the rest of Liyue, and it's why I brought up the possibility of this place simply living in the past rather than in the present. Explaining the disconnect, it's arguably the most faithful to what the nation is, excluding the colour. While I believe yellow of course fits the land of Geo for obvious reasons, and I think Liyue depicts Genshin Impact's representation of the Earth element better, in a more general sense, Chenyu Vale has a more faithful depiction of what the element of Earth is outside of the game. The Earth is thriving, the puzzles use it extremely often, and it's remained within traditions often. I remember noticing a significant lack of Seelie within the upper vale of Chenyu Vale. While I saw a few more within the southern mountain, I did notice that, relatively, there isn't many. I'm sure somebody in the comments could come in only to disagree with me with an effective argument, so take this note with a grain of salt. This aforementioned note is that, well, what if the lack of Seelie is meant to represent the fact that Chenyu Vale requires no guidance, being unanimously content with its place in the world? A little wacky, maybe disinteresting, and a bit of a stretch, but it's my video. Opinions always, people. Despite the fact that these are reasons Chenyu Vale is absolutely goated and deserves all the love it receives, I believe it also shows a disconnect with Liyue still, even if it connects to the narrative. I just want to add temporarily that I hope the last part didn't confuse you, because this video isn't about a connection to the elements, but rather the nation, and it's different to Liyue, like I just said. Intentionally or not, it's different. That's purely undeniable. I briefly stated that this could also be happening on a more realistic level, due to the 3 or so year gap between Liyue and Chenyu Vale. This is shown further through the enemies. Well, from what I know, enemy. There's some cool wolves with multiple elements at their disposal that are mainly sensitive to elemental reactions in terms of attacks. This isn't paralleled elsewhere within Liyue, reminding us, the players, that enemies are growing more complicated over time, and this will very clearly cause an undeniable disconnect anyway. A moment to go back to the environment as well, specifically being the unlocking of the third section of Chenyu Vale, Mounts Laxin? If you recall, Sumeru was greatly known for its hidden areas, being Vanarana and the Lost Nursery. Both of these areas, alongside mainly the questline that they're unlocked from, have resulted in an unfathomable amount of culture, formed purely by hatred. My reason for bringing this stuff up is because Mount Lakshin exists. I don't know how many places have hidden areas, though if I remember correctly, none do. I might be wrong, more salt is required when looking into my not-so-concise statements. This is yet another similarity to an area that isn't Liyue, causing more disconnects. These mechanics are purely wondrous and marvellous, even shown through the fact that these wolves from earlier have multiple elements at their disposal. All the puzzles and utilities utilize that adeptal energy I've brought up plenty throughout this section, being an inherently fictional fantasy-based power system within the world of Teyvat. Of course, using something like that to string together various mechanics creates a feeling of fantastical wonder within players' hearts all around the world once they enter this mystical paradise. Editing tea has returned. I somehow completely forgot to mention miasma, so my 2 cents on this mechanic is that it gives a nice parallel to the chasm, actually creating connection, yet making me wonder why the primary biome of Liyue lacks a parallel as well. On top of this, it parallels Sumeru, creating disconnection. So odd, huh? One undeniable thing though, however, is it is a fantastical, wondrous mechanic. Present T, take it away. Finally, well, I think that's it. Place is disconnected through mechanics, but it helps paint the narrative by explaining why it is, at the very least. Okay people, time to move on to story and characters, which, through narrative, pushes narrative, as well as showing a smaller amount of disconnections when compared to the other domains of Chenyu Vale's design. However, I'll still recap it all in the disconnect section. A slight disclaimer that in this section, like I stated very shortly earlier, is going to help the argument that Chenyu Vale is connected. However, the fact that the sub-region needs to rely on directly spoon-feeding you narrative to do so is slightly concerning within its own right. Also, I have cooked up rebuttals, or at least counterpoints, to some of these things. Let's get a move on, gang. Within Chenyu Vale, the narrative of traditional Adepti versus new humans is further developed within the storyline, primarily being shown towards the end of the main story quest, creating a feeling of realization. This is mostly through the main villain of the quests, Lingguan, or Lingwan. The Adepti are ironically far cooler and more memorable in this place than the main Liyue Archon quests, being shown just through their animal design. World Quest over Archon Quest is crazy. 3 main Adepti reign over Chenyu Vale, a tag team formed by rebelling against their master who tried to defend Chenyu Vale from Morax named, I don't know. These 3 Adepti were Chengshen, or Herblord, Fujin, and the aforementioned Lingguan. You may meet Fujin firstly, being incredibly sudden and forced upon you. I actually showed this off within the environment section funnily enough, so there you go. Over time, you're given the quest of rejuvenating Chenyu Vale's soil and water, helping to bring the place back to its former glory. However, the Adeptus named Lingguan did a far more literal and amplified form of this, aiming to revert Chenyu Vale to before even the humans migrated there from the chasm, all the way back before the Archon War even happened. Similar to Liyue's main story, where the Adepti do not wish to involve themselves with humans, Lingguan has the same ideology. However, due to Chenyu Vale's much more traditional and close connection with the original powers of their land, the Adepti and humans work reasonably close together. Fujin holds range-aid rights in order to prevent these bouts of infertility within Chenyu Vale from becoming detrimental to the health of the land, as well as that very thing being the reason humans use the place for things such as tea. If another thing is accurate, the people of Liyue love to exploit their land for their own gain, using the chasm as a massive mine and Chenyu Vale as a phenomenal tea place. I don't know what noun I could use for that. Not like I blame them though, because the chasm was opened up by a celestial nail very long ago, as shown in Chenyu Vale's murals within the caverns, being the reason they moved away. I have no idea what Chengshen did, but you can tell she's chill like that because she literally hangs around Baizhu 24/7, who himself is a human, I think. I don't know Baizhu lore, but I think so. Anyway, this time, Lingguan caused the infertility using miasma, similar to how Irminsul's impurities caused the withering zones within Sumeru. She wanted to, like I said, revert the place to before the humans came, showing perfectly what I mean by Adepti holding onto the past. While I don't like people coming into my home, there's a sense of irresponsibility with how they're looked up to by humans, so it definitely helps paint her as an antagonist. Also, it's because she misses her friends, but that's just another form of holding on to the past, and it is different from Liyue, worth mentioning. Disconnect. So far, this story connects perfectly to Liyue's, showing some kind of duality, and showing what would have happened if the Adepti didn't give the chant they gave to Liyue Harbor in Act 3 of the Archon quests. This is all encapsulated within one of the last dialogues of the finale in the main quest, where Little Mao, one of the consistent characters within this questline, asks the traveller how Liyue Harbor is going. Similar to Sumeru, there are 2 incredibly distinct cultures, but back to environments for a moment. I just don't think it's natural like a desert and a tropical rainforest are. The sizing is all off, and you can tell just by looking at the map that Chenyu Vale feels like an entirely different nation rather than a biome. Maybe it's because it's altered the views we as players have had for almost 4 whole years. I think that's entirely possible. Now, what's disconnecting? I did promise I had some arguments. Firstly, within Liyue, the Adepti have abodes. There are abodes within Chenyu Vale, but it doesn't take a genius to see how differently they're handled, as well as, like I mentioned, the differing quality in the animal design, because, yeah, there's that time difference. Instead of having Adeptal abodes be a primary puzzle piece in completing their questline, as well as them being domains, they're obscure locations throughout the nation, not frequently visited within the questline. At least as much as I would have hoped so. I believe this creates a disconnect. It's like how, in Minecraft, new mobs are so much more polished than the older ones. It isn't a big problem there since it isn't a whole area, and they update existing things often, but I've seen it be mentioned, and I'm sure you know what I mean. I also believe that since Chenyu Vale has in fact grown up according to the narrative, a lot of what I've said earlier in the video is kind of retconned, or at least debunked. These aren't things that cause the disconnect either, no, but rather my points in support of the area. I chalked it up to Chenyu Vale being connected due to its ability to show a traditional Adepti-driven nation in contrast to Liyue Harbor, but then what's Minlan and Wangshu in for? Even a chunk of the Adepti work with the humans before the story, such as Ganyu, Yanfei, or Madame Ping. This is the same between both areas, but not in a way that connects them, rather showing how different they are, yet still having enough things in common to not even have access to the duality argument. There is a lot of evidence as to why Chenyu Vale isn't so connected through duality, but rather just different for no reason, remaining disconnected. Finally, like I love to do for these bits at the end, all of this makes the place so wondrous. Chenyu Vale's story is driven by abnormal and paranormal power systems, helping players immerse themselves within the story through sheer excess wonder almost constantly. Whether you're wondering how they work, being stunned by the wonder of characters and themes, or just eliminating hilichurls, the place is still a wonder throughout all of this. I'll always love the world building of the nations in Genshin Impact, excluding Inazuma, but Chenyu Vale just kinda confused the perfectly content knowledge I had of the nation. Like, it builds on it, but it disconnects it more so, I think. Regardless, it's wonderful, just somewhat unfitting. The fact that they do share traits, much like Enkanomiya with Inazuma, helps give a stance to compare, showing that disconnect. The Adepti are completely different. They hardly know each other between both parts of Liyue, including the goat Chengshin. It's nostalgic, but that only throws me for more of a loop every time. Let's get moving on.
A kite is always tied down no matter how far it flies or how high it soars.
O kite born of paper, flying true and sound, a lone traveler wanders, just awaiting to be found.
This will be a recap of my points throughout the video, as while this is a retrospective to an extent on the area, it's also an argument for my views on the place. Within the environment, the overbearing similarities to Sumeru, a nation that isn't Liyue, push a disconnect, as well as contrasting to the free exploration of just walking into Liyue, Chenyu Vale pushes you right into a teleportation scene with Fujin. Instead of coming to the Adepti come to you. The chasm is a shade of Liyue's colour palette, and Chenyu Vale manages to completely oppose it, showing just how different the two places are. It makes me shiver, like that song by Ed Sheeran. On top of how similar the terrain is to Sumeru, this just helps show how little time they put into contrasting big mountains and flat land, overloading the player constantly, as well as neglecting beaches and stuff with it. Despite the lore, it makes me sob. People argue it's to give a balance between Fontaine and Liyue, but there's no fading. If they can very shortly mix the yellow and turquoise in an incredibly unnatural fashion, they shouldn't need a whole sub-region to once again mix the colour. Secondly, in the realm of gameplay, the mechanics are far more complicated and faithful to the concept of Earth than the general nation of Liyue. It has flighty simulacra, which are incredibly similar to spout rocks, possibly being one of the only similarities. Liyue represents Genshin's more unique identity given to the element of Earth, while Chenyu Vale is faithful to what Earth could be, giving the player geographically based puzzles as well as using a lot of floating jadeite islands, though even normal Liyue uses this. At least they reintroduced some classic puzzles like flying Anemo slimes, and boy are the time trials awesome in this sub-region. The story gives a lot of opportunity to build on Liyue's original narrative, usually taking it but highlighting how clearly unintentional the disconnect easily could have been within Chenyu Vale. Changshang and Baiju are some of the only proper connections given between the two places, and I feel like familiar faces could have easily mended this problem with disconnect. Not a single familiar face shows up in the main story quests. Have Gumming or something even, or Zhang Yun. In the birthday thing that happened as I'm writing this, he went to visit Chenyu Vale, god damn it. Anyway, like always, despite all of these things that could have helped it be connected, whether or not it is, it's undeniably a good addition to the game. It's allowed Rimuria's region to add new beaches to all of Upper Sumeru, given edges to Fontaine, and overall, the map is starting to look real complete. Long gone are the days of incredibly restricting borders, and now we have unnaturally empty areas that you can tell were afterthoughts because they were, yippee! Instead of me yapping about 4.6 though, let me stay on the 4.4 topic. Just remember how cool the puzzles are, how fun the nostalgic mountains are, the colourful trees, unforgettable experiences, cool caves and more. Just because it doesn't fit with Liyue doesn't mean it's bad. The place is beautiful in the daytime, but awfully ugly at night. Well anyway, that should be about doing it. This video is over now, like the song by Danny Gonzalez, and you get to wait another week for more content. If you even wait to begin with. Regardless, like, subscribe, join the membership, and well, goodbye. I hope you all have good days every day, unless you leave a hate comment or dare have an opinion that disagrees with mine, because if you do, I will subject your entire bloodline to despair for centuries to come.
When my master passed away, just as patients' families do at their loved one's deathbed, are not the lives cut short by this contract just as worthy of saving as any patients? What is this contract to us? Medicine or poison?